Hello there. Today I am here to talk to you about books that deal with the topic of obsession. We have My Husband by Maud Ventura, The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim, Looker by Laura Sims, and Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan. I'm very excited about all of these. Obsession is one of my favorite themes in literature, and I love reading books where someone is just going off the fucking rails because they are so obsessed over something. Particularly, I like it when they're obsessed about another person. Some books I can think of off the top of my head are I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel, Pizza Girl by Jean Kyung Fraser. That is the best book about obsession. I fucking love that book. You should go read it right now. I loved Big Swiss. I also loved All Fours by Miranda July, Nobody Somebody Anybody by Kelly McClory, Boy Parts by Eliza Clark, A Touch of Jen by Beth Morgan, Cursed Bread by Sophie McIntosh, Anything by Sayaka Murata, Milkfed by Melissa Broder, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. There's so many. I could go on forever. I love books about obsession, and I'm so excited to get into these. I'm going to start with My Husband by Maud Ventura, and I will tell you about it when I've read it. Hello there, I'm sitting down to talk to you about My Husband by Maud Ventura. This is a book about a woman who works part-time as an English teacher, part-time as a translator. She's living in France. She has two young-ish, like elementary school age children, and she is absolutely obsessed with her husband. Now, I am going to tell you about what happens in this book, so if you don't want spoilers, skip to the time that I'm probably going to put on the screen, and I hope there's no spoilers over there. I'll try to just talk about my thoughts, but for now, we're getting into the book. So the narrator in My Husband has this intense whirlwind kind of love with her husband. It's like they've always been in the honeymoon phase, but mostly just her with him, not really him with her. She's constantly worrying about if he's going to leave her and how he perceives her. That rhymed. She's always thinking about what she needs to do to make sure that he stays, and she meticulously curates her life and her personality so that he will stay with her. And she's also reading in, like very much so, into every little thing that her husband does and judging whether or not he loves her based off of that. Like how long he holds her hand when they're sitting on the couch together. Her husband comes from a higher class than she does, and she has put an extreme amount of effort into appearing to look effortlessly to know the etiquette of the higher class. So it's not necessarily that this stress just extends to her relationship with her husband. They go for dinner with her friends to celebrate her friend's new baby, and there is an extreme amount of stress over her picking out the flowers, like wondering what the right etiquette is, what the kinds of flowers you're supposed to pick out are, what's the classiest thing to pick. It brings her to tears because she's so concerned about picking the wrong thing. And then she feels she has picked the wrong thing, that she's brought this like overly excessive bouquet of flowers into her friend's house, and it just doesn't match with their classiness. And this large bouquet of flowers is really showing the difference between her and them, and she also thinks that they have like a better relationship than her and her husband. She's always comparing herself to them. She does things like painting the perfect picture for him to come into when he comes home from work, like her reading a book, sitting by a beautiful lamp, like she's really stressed about the lighting being perfect. She wants him to perceive her in a really specific way. And all of this is about what she thinks he wants. So there's not a huge amount of plot in this book. It's mostly inside her head, but the prologue starts with this scene where he tells her, kind of in a serious voice, that he wants to talk to her. And she is like, this is it. This is the end of our relationship. And then it goes back 6 days, and we go through each day of the week in this woman's life, in her day-to-day musings and thinking about her husband and what she does to feel closer to her husband and to feel like he loves her, and the ways that she punishes him for his transgressions against her, because she really does read into every look, touch, kiss that happens between them. She counts the seconds of their kisses and decides that other couples kiss for longer than that. She wishes that she could put up a camera in her friend's house to see how they behave when people aren't there, to compare it to her and her husband. At this dinner with her friends, they're playing some ridiculous game where you assign a fruit to each person. Her husband says that she is a clementine, which is apparently the most offensive fruit. She takes this as a full-on act of war against her, and it proves to her that he doesn't love her. She is obsessed with this clementine statement throughout the whole book. She's like, why couldn't I have been a peach or a strawberry or even an apple? A clementine is the most offensive thing I've ever heard in my life. She also clearly has some secrets that are set out in the first part of this book. Like, she's checking the mail secretly with a secret key that she has secretly copied. It's usually his job to check the mail. It's not clear what she's looking for here. There's also an envelope that she kind of like moves around the house, and at first it seems that she's moving it around the house so that he doesn't find it. but that is not the case, but I'll get to it later. She checks on this envelope a lot to make sure that the seal hasn't been broken, and it never has. After I think just a day of a bunch of little things that have convinced her that their marriage is over, this is before he tells her that they need to talk. She just thinks, he hasn't kissed me for long enough. We're not in love anymore. She then, at night, hears him say, I love you 3 times. And she's like, oh my God, he's telling me he loves me in his sleep. It's all fixed. But she can't bring herself. She slowly convinces herself that this actually didn't happen. And she can't bring herself to like fully believe it without his confirmation. So she asks him and he flat out denies it. And this destroys her. She has absolutely no confidence in herself or in her relationship. And then she has an affair with a man she has apparently been flirting with for weeks, which is like crazy. Like, girl, hello? But she says that she has this affair because of how much she loves her husband. She says the only goal in doing this is to ease the romantic pressure that weighs entirely on my husband by dividing it among several people. So she knows that she has these crazy needs and that it's causing like a lot of tension and pressure in her relationship. So she goes and sleeps with another man to ease that. And it is absolutely not the first time that she has done this. This is something that she does regularly to ease the pressures in their relationship. And it seems to work. Every time she comes home from having sex with another man, her husband has sex with her. At first, when you're reading this book, you're like, wow, she is not okay. Like, she really is reading into everything way too much. Like, this woman needs help. But then at the same time, as you read more and more, you're like, her husband actually isn't very affectionate. Like, he is not necessarily cold, but he's not kind to her. He keeps her at a distance. She's not necessarily reading into everything. I mean, what she's seeing is true. She's just reading into it way too much and assigning way too much meaning to it, but there is definitely something there. We learn her secrets, and they're nothing special. I mean, her main secret is that she's having affairs, but her secret with the envelope is that she wants her husband to be interested in her. She has written out a story of an affair in here, and she knows that if he finds it, he'll confront her about it, and so she wants him to find it. She wants him to show some sort of interest in her life. She leaves her journals out. He never touches them. Like, he just doesn't care about her all that much, and she thinks that if he looked through her stuff and found an envelope and opened it up and read what was inside, that would prove that he's interested in her and that he cares about her. Like, she's setting this up because she wants to know if he's going through her things, but it's because she wants him to go through her things. It's so interesting. And then she checks the mail just to make sure that he's not receiving secret letters from a woman that he's having an affair with. That's all there is to it. But I still, I didn't find this reveal to be unsatisfying. They throw a birthday party for her daughter. She's not that good of a mother, and she admits it. Like, she mostly had children because she thought it was her duty as a wife, and she's like a wife first and a mother second. At this birthday party, she interprets her husband as flirting with one of their friends, and so she almost immediately takes this friend's husband upstairs and just has sex with him right there in the bathroom. That is really all there is in terms of plot in this book, and it is 250 pages, so it's truly not that much plot. It's mostly just inside her head. We finally have got up to the day that the book started with, where he tells her that he wants to talk. And she's just so in her head, thinking about all of the reasons that he could be wanting to divorce her, thinking he's found out about the affair, he's found out about the guy at the birthday party, he's read my journal where I write down all of his punishments for his little transgressions against me. And then they get upstairs to the room, and he sits her down on the bed, and he says, I want to have another baby with you. And then we get to the epilogue of this book, and it turns out that he has been playing her. It's the most silly ending, but also I loved it at the same time. I thought that this book was just kind of absurd and ridiculous, and the ending fit in with that. I read this and I wasn't oh my God, I just laughed. But it wasn't in a way where I was making fun of the book necessarily. I think the book is in on its own ridiculousness. So it turns out that he is just as obsessed with her as she is with him, and he wants to keep her on a leash almost, keep her wanting him and keep her putting a lot of effort into their relationship by making her think that he doesn't love her. He does all of these things very, very deliberately. All the things that throughout the book you've thought, she's reading into it so much. Well, she's right to. He is doing these things to make her feel a certain way, and it's working. And he says that he has been spending this whole week making her super stressed out just to drop the news on her that he wants another baby, and then he is going to get a vasectomy or something and pretend that, or no, I think he's gonna dose her with birth control or plan B. I don't know. He's gonna make her think that she's infertile to make her feel really bad about herself and lose her confidence in herself and her womanliness and his desire for her. And then right when she's at her lowest point, he'll stop doing it and get her pregnant again. It's so ridiculous, but it's funny. Like, it's just kind of funny that they're both so meticulously planning everything in their lives. Everything is so curated. Everything that you think she's ridiculous for, she's actually right to think, but also, like, who would ever think those things? So she's not right, but like it is true. All the things she thinks are true. It was an absurd ending to an absurd book. Like I said, this book has no plot, but I think it does really push you through it, wanting to know how she's going to react to things, because she is just like so screwed up. I was really interested in her voice. I think she is at once very self-aware and then also entirely and uncritically convinced of everything that she believes in. All of her conclusions are just true to her, despite her self-awareness that her behavior is not normal and her thoughts are not normal. She cannot help but believing in them. There's some commentary here on those like weird listicles about how to keep your husband, 10 ways to keep your marriage successful, 5 ways to spice up your stuff in the bedroom, like all that stuff. It's not super preachy, but it is an interesting look at like how insane a woman's life would be if she believed all of the stuff that those things say. What I found the most interesting in this book, it didn't spend all that much time on it, was this issue of like untranslatability, because she works as a translator and then she teaches English to French students, and they're like translating things. And it's so interesting to me, like how things just like can't quite be translated. And I am a monoglot, really embarrassingly and unfortunately. So I don't really understand this stuff at like a basic level, so I liked the way it walked me through the issues of untranslatability. So I had a quote that I wanted to read to you about this, but that is actually a kind of nitpicky problem that I have with this book, is that the font, specifically just for the page numbers, is absolutely frustratingly unreadable, and I can't find the quote because I can't read the page numbers. It's not, my camera's not on autofocus, so I can't really show you, but like, does that say 109 or 104? I have no idea. This is a nitpick. It has nothing to do with the quality of the writing, but it honestly was frustrating the whole time I was reading this book. And it's also a problem with my handwriting. Like, what have I written here? I put a little ish symbol because I don't think I could read the page numbers when I wrote this down. Well, I guess I'll try to paraphrase. It was some book title that she was trying to translate, and every little translation was missing something. Like, you could translate it one way and get one part of the meaning out of the sentence, but then it would lose something else. And I thought that was so fucking interesting. I thought this was a fun, enjoyable little novel that really got into the head of a very obsessive woman. I liked her, like, patterns of thinking and seeing the way that she got to the conclusions that she got to, even if it was like totally unfathomable. I thought it had a fun ending that I definitely understand why some people might absolutely hate, but I personally found it to be silly in a way that fit with the book. Now that I'm finished My Husband, I am going to read Looker by Laura Sims, and I'll get back to you when I'm done with it. Hello, I'm here to talk to you about Looker by Laura Sims. This book follows a woman who is reeling in the aftermath of her failed marriage and obsessed with the actress who lives on her street. Okay, now plug your ears and close your eyes for the next few minutes while I talk to you about what happens in it if you don't want this book to be spoiled for you. So nobody has a name in this book, and I hope that doesn't make this difficult for me. The actress, that's what we'll call her. That's what the book calls her. She is, I think the narrator is obsessed with her mainly because she makes motherhood look very easy, and she makes it look easy to this narrator who has had this years-long, incredibly painful struggle with fertility. And the narrator just watches the actress like walk down the street with her baby looking blissful and carefree, and like she obviously has a lot of money and a lot of help with child rearing, and it's not the picture of motherhood that this narrator ever would have been able to achieve if she were able to have a kid. And I think that is why she latches onto this actress so insanely. So this actress is kind of spending her days alone in her apartment with the cat that her ex-husband has just left with her, even though it's his cat. He kind of just like ran out on them. And she is working as a professor and to a class of like adult students, like a very small class of adult students. And one of them, Bernardo, is very like outgoing and flirtatious with her. One night, Bernardo asks her to go out for drinks after class, and she goes with him. And he's kind of like really heavy on the flirting this entire time. And then they leave the bar and he comes on to her and she rejects him and just kind of like walks away. And when she gets home, she watches from her window as the actress is going through her rooms of her house, turning off the lights, and she can see that there's a man in her house, and all of a sudden the man attacks her. And the narrator is like screaming at the top of her lungs, and it's not clear whether or not this is actually something that has happened because it is never touched on again. For a long time after this, she doesn't say anything about the actress, which is strange because this entire book has been about the actress up until this point. It's more like the actress and then little splices of the narrator's life, whereas now it's just entirely the narrator's life, and that mostly is revolving around her relationship with Bernardo, who comes to a workshop class and brings with him a poem that he has written that is very clearly about the narrator and is incredibly erotic, and everyone in the class is very uncomfortable with this, and they also tear this poem to shreds. And then he sends her a revision of the poem using their feedback, and this revision is even more erotic, like gratuitously sexual, disgusting. Like, it honestly feels like harassment at this point. She keeps her cool and she responds very sternly and professionally and says, like, this is ridiculous, basically. Emphasizes, I'm your professor, and tells him all the things he needs to change with it. This whole thing with Bernardo has like really stressed her out. It makes her heart pound. Like, they're kind of arguing with each other, but she has to do it through this really professional language. She looks back over the emails, I think a day later, and realizes that the first revision that he sent her that she had read that was talking about his dick and balls is not there. His poem was still very erotic, very suggestive, but it wasn't this like extreme poem that she read the first time. The next time they see each other in class, he comes up and like whispers that he's sorry for what happened. The whole class is watching and very uncomfortable with this. She forgives him, but is still very stern and cold and professional. But then at the end of that class, he says, I think she actually says, why don't we go get drinks? And they get drinks and they go back to his place and they have sex. She wakes up the next morning and she regrets it. She goes back home and she ignores all of his texts. And after really just a day, he absolutely blows up on her, telling her to go fuck herself, that she's a horrible person. Like, it's crazy. But she's just pushing all this Bernardo stuff aside because she's dealing with two very big things in her life. One of which being her ex-husband, who wants the cat back, who she is not allowing into the apartment. She's changed the locks, she won't engage with him, and he has gotten a lawyer to deal with this. And the second one being the annual block party, where she knows she'll see the actress, and she is convinced that she's going to have a prolonged conversation with her. I think they've spoken once up until this point, and it was at the previous year's block party. They just had a very like small talk, like 3 sentences exchange about the foods that they had each brought. Oh my god, it's so windy and there's so much snow. Part of her focus on this block party and her dreams and fantasies of what it might be like with the actress definitely stem from trying to push out what's happening with her ex-husband, who wants his fucking cat back and wants to finalize their divorce. The day of the block party comes and she does talk to the actress. They have like a pretty nice conversation where the actress really seems to warm to her and think of her as like a little bit different than all of the people around her. It is like intense being inside this woman's head who has built up the idea of this conversation so much and is like grasping at straws trying to say exactly the right thing. They're mostly just chatting again about the food that they've brought to the potluck. And then Nathan, her ex-husband, shows up and he yells at her in front of everyone for ignoring him and not coming to the agreed upon, like, is it called a deposition? I don't know what it is. Where she was supposed to go and talk about the cat, the custody of the cat. He screams at her in front of everyone, and everyone is like really uncomfortable with this. And right before he starts screaming at her, she sees the actress coming towards her and is like, oh my god, she's gonna talk to me. And then Nathan starts screaming and the actress just like steers her children away and leaves. Nathan leaves. He's given her the divorce papers, I think, yet again, and everyone is kind of like quiet and awkward, and then slowly people start talking again, and narrator is upset. Then Mrs. H, who is one of her neighbors, who's a very nosy woman, she implies that the narrator is very obvious about her obsession with the actress. Like, she says she sees the narrator looking around the place, and she says to her, oh, you missed her, she went home. And the narrator's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But then the actress actually comes back. Mrs. H was wrong. And I think I said nobody has any names, but I guess Mrs. H and Nathan both do. And Bernardo. So actually really the only 2 people without names are the narrator and the actress. My bad. I did literally just read this book, so I don't know what I was thinking when I said that. Whatever. The actress comes back out. Mrs. H was wrong. And she very kindly starts up another conversation with the narrator. And she says, your orzo salad was delicious. Like, you don't need a chef like I do. It's a very short conversation. The narrator is taken by surprise, and it's kind of a little bit more awkward than the other one because she doesn't know what to say or how to respond. And then just like that, the conversation is over. The actress goes back to her house and they don't see each other again. And the narrator is devastated that she didn't like get invited into her home or exchange numbers. Like, I mean, they don't have names. They didn't tell each other their names. So she goes home and she's like, I have a brilliant idea. She goes out to the store, she gets all of the ingredients for this orzo salad, and she makes a big bowl of it. And as she's making it, she builds up this idea in her head yet again, something I love with obsession novels, where people are just so into it, like so immersed in their obsession that they're like, this is the way things are going to go. And they can't foresee any other outcomes. She's like, I'm going to go over there. She's going to invite me in with a glass of wine and we're going to have a lovely time. She brings this bowl over and it's a staff member who opens the door, of course. And she says, oh, no, I actually have to give it right to her. I can't just give it to you. And the staff member's like, okay, I'm going to go ask. She comes back out. She says, no, like you can give it to me. It's really nice. They really appreciate it. They extend their thanks, but it's not going to work tonight for you to come in. She's pissed. She takes the orzo and leaves. And then at 3 a.m. she goes back out there and she smashes this big, like, nice serving bowl in front of their house. Then I think the next morning when she wakes up, she has an email from Bernardo where he tells her that he is formally making a complaint against her because of this inappropriate relationship that they have had. That he felt as though his grade was in danger if he didn't have sex with her, and so he did, and he feels really uncomfortable with it, and he's going to her department head. She has a meeting with her department head, and he basically says, yeah, this is ridiculous. She says, yeah, this is ridiculous. But she does end up losing her job, not because of Bernardo, just because of like budget cuts. She's not a tenured professor, and this is when she really goes off the rails. I think there's another impending court date about the custody of the cat, which she ends up killing, suffocating with a pillow. I feel like this was something that you could feel was going to happen from the beginning. I think a lot of people probably didn't want it to happen. I don't think it was really necessary for the story. It was fine. It was whatever. She kills the cat. She buries it in the yard. She tells Nathan that she's killed the cat. Nathan's like, I don't even believe you, but no, she does not tell him that she's killed the cat. She tells him that the cat is dead, that an accident happened or something. And he says, I don't even believe you that the cat's dead. But if she is dead, I'm pretty sure you did it. So then she does this thing where she returns all of the stuff that she has taken from out front of the actress's house. It's like really common in their neighborhood when people are done with stuff for them to put it outside in a box and let the neighbors take whatever they want. And she has taken every single thing she's seen outside of this actress's house ever. It's like a whole room filled up with stuff. She also sometimes steals things, like a children's bike she just took from out front that was obviously not meant to be. It was like inside the gate. It was not meant to be taken by anyone. She went at night and she stole that, and she ends up returning everything back to this house to send a message to the actress. She's at once really upset with her about the orzo thing, but still very much obsessed with her and wanting to understand where she's coming from. And she wants the actress to see all this stuff and to feel like she is seen on a deeper level by this narrator. And she puts all this stuff back in the yard in this very like artful and deliberate setup. Like she calls it a tableau. And she kind of just sits on her stoop. She's lost her job. She doesn't have the cat anymore. Her ex-husband's not coming around. She sits on her stoop and she just kind of watches the actress's house. She watches when they first come out in the morning after she's left all this stuff there. And she sees their very upset reactions to everything that's been laid out in front of her. One day, Mrs. H comes by and she tells her, she says, you know they're moving out, right? And it's like unspoken. Like Mrs. H doesn't need to say who she's talking about because they both know that she is obsessed with this actress. And when she sees the for sale sign outside of their home, this is when she really starts ramping up the stalking behavior and kind of planning, like loosely planning, kind of fantasizing about kidnapping her and keeping her in her home. At the very end of the book, she ends up chasing this woman down. She tries to stop her when she goes out for her run. She says, hey, wait. And the woman looks at her and then bolts for her house. And she chases her down. She gets there and she's pounding on the door. Like, the actress has made it inside quickly. She can see that the actress is calling 911. And then from behind her, Mrs. H, this like old woman, shows up. She taps her on the shoulder and she actually very kindly, she's not been a kind woman up till this point. She's been like, "Where's your husband? I haven't seen your husband in a long time." Really trying to get under her skin and getting her to say where he's gone. At this point, she taps her on the shoulder and she kindly says, "Hey, you have to calm down. You're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble." And the narrator turns around and she pushes this woman down the stairs and her head hits the ground and she dies there. So I thought that this book was fun, but I don't think it was very well written. I think it was actually written with a confidence that it did not deserve. Particularly in the beginning, it's so heavy-handed with the exposition. She'll say, "Oh, the bird was gone, just like my ex-husband." Honestly, over and over again, it was stuff like that. Like, I get, like, okay, your ex-husband left you. "Oh, it was empty, just like my womb." Girl, please. I thought that the formatting was stupid. There's no chapter breaks, and it's all like these paragraphs that are split up by line breaks, and there's no reason for that. It never made any sense. There's kind of chapter breaks in the sense that there will be like a little star, and that indicates new scene. I don't think that this needed to be written like that. I don't think it added anything. I think it was just like annoying. Like, you thought you were doing something. What were you doing? What were you doing? I don't understand why she made that choice. What I liked about this book is that it was quick and it just got faster and faster as you read it. This was like a 1-day read. You can really get through this. Even though there's no chapter breaks, like, you want to know what happens, and the plot is fast. I loved the narrator's unreliability, and I really wish that it got more into her skewed perceptions. Like, when she reads the poem wrong the first time, just like reads an entirely different poem and then goes back and it's just completely different. That was such an interesting aspect, and I would have really liked to see more of that. I wanted to see her struggling with reality in a more tangible sense that was not just entirely internal, like her own perceptions of things, like her own perceptions of other people's behaviors. Like, I wanted her to actually be like perceiving real material things wrong more than just the one time. I just thought it was so interesting. I thought we would go back to it, and then we never did. Something I did really like about this narrator that I thought was pretty unique is that she still sees herself as desirable. And I think a lot of women that I've read in this position, I mean, I had also just read The Husband, where she is like obsessed with the idea of her desirability for her husband. But I think a lot of people who are just coming off of a marriage, who are struggling with fertility, and who are in this very isolated, lonely state, think of themselves as undesirable. And she didn't. She was like, "I'm hot and I know it." And it wasn't like over the top. Like, it wasn't like everybody wants me so bad, but she did like understand her own beauty, and I enjoyed that. At the end of the day, this was extremely mediocre writing, like maybe worse than mediocre, but it was very entertaining. And I think that that was all that it really needed to be. I do think this is marketed wrong. It says it's like a thriller, and it's not. It's not a thriller. It's very much internal. It gets quite fast, maybe a little bit thrillery right at the end there, but it really cuts you off. Like, it ramps up and then it's just like a sharp cutoff. So if you're looking for a thriller, don't read this. But if you're looking for just like a little bit of fluff, a book that is not saying or doing anything new or special, but is very much entertaining and quick to read, I would recommend this. The next book I'm reading is The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monika Kim. I'm like 2/3 of the way through it, but I'm going to wait until I'm done to come and talk to you about it. Hello, I am back to update you. It's only been a couple of days, but I have definitely read 2 full books and finished all the reading for this video, so I'm going to talk to you about both of them. The first book I read was The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monika Kim. So in short, this book is about a woman. She's like 18, it's her first year of university, and her life falls apart after her father has an affair and leaves her mom. And then her mom starts seeing a really shitty guy, and this is very clearly a piece of horror fiction. I'm not going to keep showing you the cover because it's horrible. I don't want to fucking look at it. So the book opens in the aftermath of Jiwon's father leaving her mother, and her mother is completely distraught. And they're having dinner, and her mom is eating the eyes of the fish that they're eating because eyes are said to bring good luck. Fish eyes, I think specifically, are said to bring good luck. Her mom starts seeing this guy, George, pretty quickly after her father leaves. Her mom is still in a very vulnerable and upset state, and George comes in white man with a fetish, and he starts seeing her. He is this nasty, insufferable man who like can't keep his eyes to himself with both Ji-won and her younger sister, who is 15 years old. And her mom is just head over heels, totally fucking starstruck by this guy. They are like in love with she is in love with him. He is absolutely just using her. And then there's more shitty men. In school, Ji-won makes friends with this absolutely fucking insufferable, performative, virtue signaling, like a woman respecter named Jeffrey. He comes to school and he's like holding the book We Should All Be Feminists. And he like has shirts on that say I'm with her and stuff like that. It is genuinely so hard to read. And right from the jump, Jeffrey is like super kind of protective of his relationship with Ji-won. He doesn't want her to know anybody else or to talk to anybody else. He's very like territorial over her, but he's trying to hide it behind jokes. She can see it, but she's like, well, I was like that with my friends. I understand where he's coming from. I felt the same way. And she's just like, oh, it's so nice to have friends again. And she's teasing this thing that has happened with her high school friends who she has fallen out with. And it turns out that she just didn't get into Berkeley. Like they had all, this group of girls had all had this plan to get into Berkeley, and they were going to live in the same dorm, and then they were going to get jobs afterwards, you know, like how kids plan their lives. They had this plan, and she was the only one who didn't get into Berkeley. And so she sabotaged the friendship of all of the rest of the girls so that they couldn't live this life without her. And they caught on to this. They quickly understood that she was sending texts behind their backs and like sowing dissent. That's not the right word. Throughout all of this, she is becoming more and more obsessed with blue eyes, specifically George's piercing blue eyes. She dreams of them at night. She sleeps in the same bed as her sister. They live in a really small apartment. And when George is staying the night, she asks to sleep on the wall side so that she can like listen to him breathe and think about his blue eyes. She does hate this guy and hates everything that he does and everything that he stands for, but she is obsessed with his eyes. And she walks down the street and she sees particularly men with piercing blue eyes, and she can't think about anything else. She's just like so enraptured with the idea of blue eyes and with how she thinks they would feel in her mouth. Now her life is just slipping out from underneath of her. Her grades are falling. She was a really good student in high school, but now she's on academic probation. She's fighting with George all the time. She's also taking out a lot of her feelings on her sister, who is the only person in the world going through the exact same thing she is. Jeffrey is still getting more and more demanding and more territorial. He doesn't like her friendship with another woman in their class, Alexis. And he's just kind of like always there, always hanging around her, always saying things that are like just a little bit off. And she's just letting it all slide. Someone at one point follows her onto a bus. They have like a scarf and a hat on, so she can't tell who it is. And she convinces herself it's George when it's so obviously Jeffrey. And there are a few moments where she's like, someone's following me, and she turns around and there's no one there, and then she catches like a glimpse of movement. It's very clear that it's Jeffrey following her. And then George and her mom are engaged to be married. And this is terrible news because George is the worst guy fucking ever. He has just a general Asian fetish. He's ogling every Asian woman that he sees. He's also just like racist in all the other ways. He's kind of like a Republican man. He's a really just disgusting and gross dude. And her mom is blinded by her love for him, or her love for the attention that he is giving her, because I think her mom feels really undesirable and unwanted after being left by her father. Now, once the two of them are engaged, Ji-won's voice changes. It becomes a lot angrier and a lot more action-oriented to unsettling George and getting him out of their lives. And she talks a lot about like the dominance of men and how frustrating men can be and how much they've harmed her and the women in her family. And then at this same time, she's kind of like moving herself away from Jeffrey and towards her friend Alexis. And Jeffrey's being really pushy. He's like relentlessly texting her, I have a Christmas gift for you. Let me give you this Christmas gift. And then he finally like corners her, makes her open this Christmas gift, and it's a pair of fucking chopsticks. And she's like, oh, ew. Jeffrey sucks. And Alexis has kind of indicated how much she doesn't like Jeffrey, because he's always in class saying just like a whole bunch of buzzwords about the patriarchy and feminism, trying to signal to women that he's a good, safe guy. Like truly the first conversation that Ji-won and Jeffrey have, he's like, it's really important to me that women feel safe around me. And you're like, oh my god, I fucking hate this dude. So she's really trying to stay away from him, and he is relentlessly contacting her, and she's just like avoiding him, running out of class as fast as she can so he can't talk to her, not answering any of his texts, that kind of thing. And at the same time, she's doing this thing where she's trying to get under George's skin and unsettle his dominance in their lives. So like one day she hides his keys, and she has noticed that he has too many keys on his keychain, and she said, hey, what are those keys for? And he's given this kind of like evasive answer, and she's like, I know that these keys are leading to another apartment where he lives, probably with another woman. She knows that he is playing her mom. So one night she goes over to Alexis's place, and she clearly has a huge crush on Alexis, and they drink a little bit. I think they're studying for an exam, and then she leaves. And when she leaves, she stumbles across a dead homeless man, a man that she had seen when she first got there. She had given him a little bit of change, and there he is in the bush, dead. She peels back his eyelids, and he has blue eyes. So, needing more force than she thought was necessary to do this, she rips this man's eye out of his head, and then she hears someone rustling behind her. It's obviously fucking Jeffrey. He doesn't say anything to her, though. She slips the eyeball into her pocket, and then she runs. And then she goes and she washes off the eyeball, and she eats it. And she loves it. It's delicious. It's exactly what she wanted. She cleans herself up and she gets home. And when she's home, she overhears George in the other room talking on the phone. He obviously doesn't know that she's there. And she can hear him talking about this other woman in his life, Jen. And he's saying, you know, this one will just be my side piece when Jen finally takes me back. And on this phone call, he also says, you should see her daughters. They're sexy. They're little sluts, especially the younger one. You should see the ass on her. 15 years old. So I think it's important to mention here that Alexis has given Jiwon some sleeping pills because she has talked to her about how she's struggling. Like Alexis has noticed that she's kind of going off the fucking rails, and she said, oh, these will help you sleep. Like my roommate gave them to me. Okay. One of these days, George is sleeping on the couch, and Jiwon goes over and she stands over him with a knife in her hand. And she just like slices his cheek a little tiny bit, and then he doesn't wake up. And she's really thinking about cutting this guy's eyes out because she is overcome with her thoughts of eating George's eyes specifically. But she ends up like coming out of this haze of a state and dropping the knife. It clatters to the floor. George wakes up and he mentions that he feels a little bit woozy and a little bit like he took a sleeping pill. She's drugged him and she doesn't remember it. So there's like, this is not this like out of the blue thing. Like there has been some premeditation here that Jiwon is not really aware of, it seems. And then on that, I'm telling you this in like a really obvious way. I liked the subtlety here with the sleeping pills. Like Alexis gives her these sleeping pills way earlier in the book. Then we hear George say this thing of like, oh, I'm feeling a bit woozy. And then Alexis is telling Jiwon about this homeless man who died outside of her house and how it's being treated as a homicide. She only knows this because like her cousin works at the police department. It's being treated as a homicide because he was found with sleeping pills in his system, or like someone drugged him and parts of his body were removed. So this is like another thing where it's like, oh, Jiwon has premeditated this. Like likely when she gave him those coins, she gave him drugs that made him fall asleep, and then she took his eye out. It doesn't ever really get into this, but I think that this is the most subtle thing in this very heavy-handed book, and it's done very well. Her and Alexis do a lot of studying because she, again, is on academic probation, and then they celebrate. Alexis has her over, and they have snacks, and they're like doing this very queer woman thing where neither of them, I don't even know if they know they're queer or if they know that they have like a crush on each other, but it is super, super obvious. They get drunk and they go and they run out into the street and they're like wrestling with each other in the street. And then all of a sudden, who shows up but fucking Jeffrey? And Jeffrey's like, you've been ignoring my texts. Oh, this is so random that I've ran into you here. You've been ignoring my texts. Why aren't you talking to me? They managed to like get rid of him, but Alexis is definitely giving Jiwon the side eye, especially because she has talked before about how she doesn't like Jeffrey. And I think she knows that Jeffrey is trying to keep the two of them apart. This night when Jiwon leaves Alexis's apartment, I think she leaves kind of in like, a drunken stupor, but also in a state of upset. I think she gets drunk and she starts thinking about blue eyes and how they would taste and how that first one that she ate tasted. And she's just like spiraling and spiraling in the bathroom. And then she's like, I just gotta go. I have to leave. I have to get out of here. So she goes, and outside of Alexis' apartment is another man like lying in a bush. And he is injured. I think it's clear he's got into like some sort of fight. It's like a university kid area. It's probably just like a drunken fight that he's gotten into. And he's very much out of it, like lying unconscious on the ground. And she peels his eyes open, and of course, they're bright, piercing blue. And so she starts to pry his eye out of his head, but he is living. And so he wakes up and he starts fucking screaming and dragging her along the ground, like trying to, I don't know. I don't think he's like really there. He just knows something's happening to her and he is fighting back. And she hears him screaming and she just kind of like sits there waiting for somebody to come and arrest her, but then nobody does. So she kills him. She stabs him in the throat a bunch of times, pops his little eyeballs out, chews him up. It's gruesome. It's really gruesome. I'm trying not to be too gruesome about it. In her life at home, she's still really fucking with George. She like takes his driver's license out of his wallet and she puts it in the garburator, and then she takes his father's Rolex, which is like his most prized possession from a father who didn't really love or care about him, and I think she like puts it somewhere near his car so that he runs over it in the morning, and this leaves him very distraught. All of these things are like building up, and he's like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, am I losing my mind? It's doing exactly what she wants it to do. One day she sees his car out and she follows him around, and she sees him meet up with Jen, another Asian woman, and he's clearly using her in the same way that he's using Ji-won's mom. Like, he's talking to this woman about how he's been on so many work trips lately when really he's been staying at Ji-won's house with her mother. At this time, George is spending a lot of time working on this big presentation, and it's another excuse for him to like get out of the house and probably go and stay with this other woman, but he is doing a big presentation for his work. And the night before the presentation, she gets his laptop, she deletes his PowerPoint and makes a new PowerPoint, and she also shreds all of his files, like his paper documents, and then replaces them with like Asian girl porn. And then he goes off to work. And then, of course, he gets fired. At this same time, she is also catfishing him with images of a young Asian woman because she knows that he's on all of these fucking dating sites. He has this fetish and he uses women and he's disgusting, and so she knows exactly how to play into his hand. Then one night she gets herself into another, I don't know, maybe she's drinking, maybe she's just upset about something, I'm not exactly sure why, but she is in a state and she goes kind of perusing around. Actually, she might just be at Alexis's house again. All the little murders she does might happen like right after coming from Alexis's house. In any case, she's driving around and she sees this guy coming outside of the bar and he's really fucking drunk. And she says, do you need a ride? And he gets in. And she is like definitely musing a little bit about how he has no concern for his own safety and how different men's lives are in this sense. And she also recognizes him as a man that she had overheard in like the very first few chapters in a coffee shop talking about how like sex is different with Asian women and just being really fucking disgusting. And he had made her really uncomfortable, even though she doesn't even know if he saw her. She just remembers this guy. And this is the guy she's picked up. So she takes him to an abandoned lot. And yet again, she tries to just kind of pop his eyes out without killing him first. And so he's screaming his fucking head off. She has to like stab him a bunch of times. And then she pops his eyes out and she eats them. Back at school, after ignoring all of his like relentless texts and calls, Jeffrey finally corners her and he says, we need to talk. Let's go walk over here and let's have a little talk. He takes her down this secluded street, which makes it a little bit tense. And then he makes her sit down beside him and he says, I have feelings for you. And like, okay, obviously. And she's like, Jeffrey, I don't feel the same way. And he's like, no, like, I'm in love with you. You need to at least give me a chance. And she says, I'm not going to do that. Absolutely not. Like, this is not reciprocated. And he is kind of getting angrier and angrier, and she ends up running away. And when she does, she leaves her backpack there with him, which kind of just like makes her really upset, as it would anyone. I think she doesn't lose anything of huge value. It's all things that can be pretty easily replaced, but she wants her fucking backpack. But then one of the next days at school, she has, she's using an old backpack. She's reprinted off her homework assignments. Everyone at school is really tense. And Alexis tells her that they have found a body near the school and they're connecting it to other bodies that have been found, and they're considering it like maybe some sort of serial killer, and that they're not sure if the students at the school are safe, because the second two people that she killed, they were both students of the school, and this is like yet another student killed very close to the school. And Ji-won's like, fuck, I thought I had more time. They found him way sooner than I thought they were going to. She's going through all the things in her head to like calm herself down, everything that she needs to do to make sure that this isn't traced back to her. And she's like, oh, I got to get rid of the knife. I'll throw it in the LA River. And then she thinks, fuck, that knife is in my backpack that I lost. And so she is just in a state of unbelievable stress. She's going completely off the rails. She's like calling Alexis in the middle of the night, making sure that she doesn't hate her and like just freaking the fuck out all the time. At one point, she's in the library. I think she's probably just like on one of the computers looking at photos of blue eyes. And then Jeffrey confronts her and that he backs her into a corner in the library. He says, I have your backpack and I will give it back to you. It's locked in my house. I'll give it back to you when you've proven that you can be good. And he's like, oh, of course I was following. Of course I've been following you around. I needed to make sure you're okay because I needed to protect you because you're a woman and I'm a man and I'm in love with you. That's what you do for the people that you love, Jiwon. He's so fucking ridiculous. It's clear that he's saying, I'll give it back to you if you give me a chance. If you date me. If you give me a little kiss on the mouth. He's a fucking pervert. In her home life, George has kind of disappeared. He's lost his job. It seems he's definitely just like gone back to this woman, Jen. But Jiwon is still catfishing him. And so she gets him to meet up with her at a coffee shop. And she gets to the coffee shop and she puts the sleeping pills into his coffee. And then she meets him in his car and she confronts him. He's like, oh my God, why is it you that's here? And she's like, I need to talk to you about my mom. She still thinks that you're getting married in 2 weeks. You won't come home. You won't answer her calls. And she's just trying to like kill time until the sleeping pills hit him. And then they do. And she drives him out to, I think, another fucking abandoned lot. And she tries to pop his eyes out again without killing him first. And she fails, of course. I mean, if someone like plunges a knife into your eye socket, even if you are really drugged out on sleeping pills, I think you're still probably going to be able to summon up the energy to react to that. And he does. And he chokes her nearly to death. But what he doesn't know is that right before she had taken him here, she called Jeffrey for some reason that is explained, but like not really. She called him and she said, you got to meet me here. So Jeffrey shows up just as George is squeezing the life out of her. And then she wakes up 4 days later in a hospital with her mother and sister. And her sister says, you had a brain tumor. Fuck, I was so annoyed at this part. You have a brain tumor. They took it out. They were testing you, gave you a scan because they thought you had a concussion. And it turns out you had a brain tumor all along. That's why you've been wanting to eat eyes. And Jiwon's thinking, and she's like, oh my God, I don't even feel obsessed with blue eyes anymore. Like, I think this life of pain that I thought I was going to have because of this obsession is okay. Everything is going to be okay. Her mom and sister tell her that George did survive, even though Jeffrey showed up and he beat George over the head with a fucking rock. George survived, and Jeffrey was taken into custody because of this beating, but there was no one who could go against his word, and so they released him, and he has been trying relentlessly again. He's like so fucking persistent to get into the hotel. He's been trying to get into this hospital room to talk to Jiwon, and the nurses haven't been letting him. And while she's staying in the hospital, Jiwon is noticing that her mother, every so often, goes out to go see someone else. Even though it is clear that George tried to fucking kill her daughter, this woman is still committed to him and going into his room in secret, knowing that it's wrong and knowing that she shouldn't be, and yet still doing it because she thinks that he loves her. She is so fucking deluded. Also, can I just say that everything that's explained to her is explained to her by her sister and mother as if you haven't had brain surgery and been in a medically induced coma for 4 days, as if a doctor wouldn't come and talk to you. This end bit, I could not suspend my disbelief anymore. The way this book ended, oh my God, frustrated me so fucking much. At one point, Jiwon learns that George is in the room next to her that is connected by a wall with a door that locks on his side. Am I just an idiot, or would that never happen? Man tries to literally kill a woman. Not only are they in the hospital side by side in their rooms, like, would they not be on different wards? What fucking ever. Side by side rooms, he tried to kill her. And the door between their rooms, there's a door between their rooms, and it locks on his side. What are you fucking talking about? That is so ridiculous. And obviously, it is used. It's very useful for the plot that there's this door between them. Because as it turns out, the brain tumor did not fix her, and she still wants to eat George's eyes. And so, late one night, I think She slips him fucking sleeping pills again. She stabs him. He's not connected to any monitors. This doesn't set off any alarm bells for fucking anybody. She goes into the room. She kills him. She pops his eyes out. She eats them. And she calls Jeffrey. And she says, come on over here, Jeffrey. I actually want to talk to you. And then Jeffrey shows up. And she says, oh, could you move that knife over in this stuff? I'm just so weak I can't move this stuff. The knife that was used to stab George. He picks it up, gets his fingerprints all over it. And then she hits the call nurse button as he's trying to be like, oh my God, I'm so glad that you finally called me here. She's framed him for everything. And it all works out in the end. He gets taken away. His fingerprints are on the knife. The knife that was used on the other people is in her backpack in his house, which questionable. Definitely like doesn't have his fingerprints on it, but whatever. The shitty guy, Jeffrey, in the end gets framed for it all, and everything ends happily ever after in some ways, but not others, because it does end with Ji-won saying, I'm tired of what men have done to the women in my life, and the next man who's going to pay is my father. So if you can't tell by the way I'm talking about it, I did think that this book was fucking stupid. I thought in the beginning, you know what? This is corny, but it's entertaining. It's like classic horror in that way. And then by the end, I wanted to bang my head into a fucking wall. I hated it. I hated the way this book ended. It got so incredibly ridiculous. At the end of the day, there was a very small concept, like a little tiny glimpse of a story in the author's head, and she just did not think it through or flesh it out. I think she just sat down in like probably some drug or mental illness induced psychosis. No, I can't say that. That's horrible. I can't say that. So I have two positive things to say about this book. For most of the book, it's very fun. And it's very fast. And it's easy to read. And then also there is this thing with a little bit of subtlety with this sleeping pill that she has. And then people have been drugged. And it doesn't like get into it. It has the ability to be subtle. But God, is it not in almost everything. I mean, the themes that it explores, it's beating you over the fucking head with them. The characters are all at the same time, like, so obvious, so ridiculously over the top. They're all caricatures, and they are so flat. There's absolutely no complexity to them. Like, the book is screaming at you, this is how this character is, and this is how you should feel about them. Like, George and Jeffrey and her mother and her sister and Alexis, like, literally every single person in this book is a ridiculous caricature, and it's impossible to connect to any of them. And that connection is also made difficult by the fact that the dialogue is incredibly clunky. It doesn't feel like real people talking. It doesn't feel like how real people talk. And she also tries to get through, like, there's some texting, and the texting is supposed to be like, look how people text, and they use shorthand and stuff, and it makes it so much more obvious how unskilled this author is at writing dialogue, because, like, wow, nobody has ever texted like that in the history of humankind. I also felt like all these people opened up, like Alexis and Jeffrey and Ji-won, when they meet each other, like, second conversation, they're talking about, like, their secrets and, like, the baggage that they have and everything that's like going on inside their heads, and they don't really know each other at all. And it also feels like Ji-won should be more of a private person based on being inside her head for this whole book. Like, you would think that she wouldn't just like all of a sudden be telling everybody everything about her, but she does, like, over and over again. And with this book being so poorly thought out, it is also poorly like researched. This is just me being really nitpicky, but also I think that this should not have slipped past editing. Okay, Ji-won is talking about how she feels like everybody she passes by on the street is a man with blue eyes, and how that shouldn't work with the statistics of the population. She's saying there's 30,000 people at my school, and only 8% of people in the world have blue eyes. So there should only be 600 people at my school with blue eyes. But then 49% of my school is men, so it should only be 300 people. So why does everybody have blue eyes? That is not correct. Those are not the right statistics to be pulling from, because sure, on a global scale, 8% of people have blue eyes. The demographics of the United States, where this book takes place, are so completely different. 27% of people have blue eyes. That's just wrong. It would be way more than 600 people. And then at the same time, this one's maybe a little bit more forgivable, but I think it's pretty well known that universities have much higher percentages of women students than men. 49% is how many men there are on planet Earth, not in universities. Like, it's probably closer to 41%. I need to calm down. That made me so upset because it just, like, reading it to me, I was like, this is so clearly and obviously wrong. Like, this was just like a few Google searches that she did, and she didn't even do them right. And it pissed me off. Something else that I really didn't like about this book that I think could be explained in some ways, but still kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, is when Ji-won meets Alexis. Alexis is a black woman, and she describes her in a way that she doesn't really ever describe anybody else. Like, she gets really into, like, her honey-colored eyes and the splatter of freckles across her cheeks. And it's, like, very exotifying in a way. And I think this is done in part because Ji-won is, like, a queer woman, though it never really gets into that. It's quite obvious that she has a crush on Alexis. I think that is why she goes so over the top explaining Alexis's beauty. But it is unsettling. Like, I feel like it is kind of, like, very othering. And I think there's a world in which this book was saying something with that, in the way that Ji-won is almost fetishizing Alexis in the way that George fetishizes her mother and her sister and these other women. I don't think it was self-aware enough to be doing that, though. And it really was just, like, one paragraph that we never really came back to. But I remember reading it and thinking, this is a bit weird. I don't really like the way she's describing this woman. I actually do have one more kind of positive thing to say about it. During the book, every once in a while, and it becomes increasingly frequent, there is this little, like, interjection from a voice in her head. It's like aligned to the right. It's in italics. It's very obvious. It's like it really cuts into the text. And this goes back and forth between being second person point of view, like saying you in regards to Ji-won, and first person point of view, like she's speaking as herself. And I didn't know at first if this was deliberate, like if the author knew that she was switching around between these two things. I think it definitely was. And I think as the book progresses, it becomes more Ji-won's voice and less this, like, voice speaking to her in her head, like as she accepts this voice as her own. And I think that was clever, and I think that it was well done. Most of this book, however, was not very well done. It was very heavy-handed. It was so ridiculous at the end. I don't even want to talk about it. It pissed me off. I finished reading this book and I was, like, so annoyed. It could have just been, like, a nice, fun, corny, kind of horrific, fast-paced read until the end, just like, I was so done with it. At the end of the day, if you're looking for something horrific and quick and kind of stupid, this book is for you. I went and made a cup of tea, but I am now here to talk to you about Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan. In short, this follows an incredibly toxic relationship between two shitty people, one of whom is a lot shittier than the other, and the other is our narrator. This is very compelling, but there isn't much plot here. It's mostly just the narrator's internal thoughts in her absolutely suffocating brain. It starts with her falling instantly in love with this man, Kieran, who she's met at, like, an art gallery showing. She is this troubled 20-something-year-old woman living in Dublin, and she has a very clear drinking problem and sex problem. And she doesn't really know herself. She knows how she wants to look and how she wants to be perceived, what she wants other people to think of her, but she doesn't know what she actually wants, what her real desires are outside of other people. And then on the outside, Kieran is this beautiful, tall, lanky, quiet, kind of solemn man who is very cold and very cruel. The two of them start dating, and our narrator is head over heels in love with this guy, and he has no redeeming qualities, and he is very good at manipulating her and her low self-worth into, like, wanting him and doing everything for him. He is just, like, angry and mean. He gets home from work and people will, like, just irritate him. He hates everybody and he just rants and rants about it. And she loves to be on his side and to make him feel like he's righteously angry. They're ridiculous. They're sleeping together for, I think, a couple of months. And then one day she takes him to this, like, reading of poetry or something that her friends are doing. And this is the first time that they've really behaved as a couple. And the entire time, he doesn't say a word to anyone. He just stands there and he sulks. And then at the end of the night, she kind of gets upset with him and he says, "What? They're your friends. They're not my friends. It's not like we're together. Did you think I was in love with you?" He says, "We're just sleeping together. I don't give a fuck about these people." And this, of course, upsets her and also just makes her want him more. This is like a pretty significant fight between the two of them. And then a few days later, he comes over and he's kind of groveling and he apologizes for how he's behaved. And he explains to her about his past with his ex, Freya. Him and Freya have kind of recently broken up. They had a long-term relationship. He says he is still in love with her, and they broke up because Freya had been like serially cheating on him. And he does this thing that I think is pretty common with men in straight relationships who have been wronged by one woman, where he's very guarded with himself. And he's like, I can't open myself up to you because I don't want you to hurt me in the way that Freya did. But he does say, like, I want to let my past go. I'm still in love with Freya, but I do want to be here with you. And then months of them dating later, he just kind of like casually drops the information that he has been writing poems about Freya, and that he has been sending these poems to her, and that these poems are about like the beginning of their relationship when they were living in Oslo, before the cheating and the fighting and the breakup, when it was like this beautiful relationship that he obviously really was into. He is still in love with this woman, and the narrator knows it. And so the narrator is trying to mold herself into whatever it is that she thinks Kieran wants in that moment. She goes home to see her parents for Christmas, and over the entire week that she's there, he doesn't contact her once. This is in like 2013, so she's buying minutes on his phone, making sure that that's not the reason that he's not contacting her. She's convincing herself that he has died. He just doesn't answer. And when she finally gets back, she texts him and says, I got home, I'm coming over. And he responds instantly and says, stay right there, I'll be there in an hour. And he comes home and he breaks up with her in a very cruel way. Like, she can see this mocking in his eyes as he breaks it off with her, and she knows that Freya is back in his life. The cruelty of this man is just absolutely boundless. He is an awful human being. He is an awful partner, and he just doesn't care. And yet the narrator mourns this relationship for months. Her life, in a lot of ways, is just during the relationships that she has. In between relationships, she's kind of just like drifting. She doesn't know who she is without men and without sex and without desire. Now, in these months of mourning, the narrator is obsessively looking at Freya on social media, and I think really comparing herself to Freya. She will like take time out of her week, like specific blocks of time, where she just looks at Freya and looks at Freya. And this goes on for a long time. And she is in a fugue state during these months of mourning. And then finally she breaks and she texts him, I'm thinking about you, I miss you. And he texts her back and they get back together. And 2 weeks later, they've moved in together. And while they're living together, she is convinced that like being a domestic housewife will convince him that he needs her. She wants him to rely on her in a lot of ways. She makes all of his meals. She does all the laundry. She cooks and she cleans. And she just is trying to like wiggle her way into his life so that he can't survive without her help. Kieran's mood can shift in an instant. He is so miserable and so hateful and so irritable, and I think the book does a really good job of setting you up to know his character and know how he'll react to things, which makes some situations quite tense. Like, they go for a movie and he's in a good mood for the first time in maybe ever, and they're at this movie and there's teenage boys behind them and they're being really loud, and we as the reader and the narrator as well can tell that this is really getting to Kieran. Like, his mood sours instantly and he's so pissed off, and then like every time the teenagers say anything or like shout or throw food at each other or just act like fucking teenage boys, you're like, oh, this is the moment where he's gonna blow up. And then finally he says, can you just shut the fuck up? And they start mocking him, and feeling like he's being mocked is the worst thing in the world for Kieran. And so he just storms off and he leaves, and it totally ruins the state between the two of them. And the narrator is just kind of like begging for him, let's just go for dinner. And he's like, we already had dinner. She just like wants to get back those moments of goodness, and he is withholding. He knows that that is the way to punish her, and if anything goes wrong, she is the one who gets punished for it, even if it's not her fault in the slightest. She is so isolated in this relationship. Of course she is. It's an abusive relationship. That is a marker of an abusive relationship. She has cut everyone in her life off, and she also knows that she can't talk to anybody about the realities of her relationship with Kieran because she knows how it sounds, and she can't get into the complexities of why it's not how it sounds, even though of course it is how it sounds. And at this time she's also self-harming, trying to get him to express his care for her, to knock on the bathroom door and ask her what she's doing, to point out the wounds on her thighs, and to like say anything to do anything to show her that he likes her. But he doesn't. He is just the coldest man in the world. And during this later stage of their relationship, her resentment starts to grow, particularly around the tasks that he hasn't necessarily asked her to do, but this just kind of quietly became her job, like making all of the meals for them. She starts to resent him for doing this. And so she's starting to push back against these rules that Kieran has kind of unilaterally set in their lives, mostly rules about her behavior that he's never given any reason or explanation for. He just doesn't like them, and he uses this obviously as a method of control and manipulation. Like, he doesn't like that she drinks. Drinking is absolutely something that she struggles with, and that's not why he doesn't like it. He just doesn't want to see her be sloppy, and he can look at her with this like expression of absolute unfiltered disgust that makes her not want to drink anymore, even though it is something that she really enjoys. And one day they're in the grocery store and she sees the wine and she says, "I think I'll have wine with dinner tonight." And he says, "No, you won't. That's a bad idea. Like, you'll be hungover." She says, "I'll just have a little bit. I won't be hungover." And she kind of forces him. She like plays her hand well, and she forces him into admitting why he doesn't like her drinking. And he can't, because the reason just is he doesn't like it, and he needs to have an actual like excuse, and she's putting him in this situation where he needs to give her this excuse. So he says, "Oh, it's a health thing." She's like, "You don't care that I smoke cigarettes." And so she has an upper hand now, and her pushing back against the ways that he has taken advantage of her like docile nature and her desperation for his desire, this becomes something that she does more and more. And she's also getting her power back privately. She starts drinking in secret, hiding it from him. He makes a rule, okay, we can drink a little bit, but only one night a week. So on that night, she'll drink an entire bottle of wine before he gets home. She'll go out, dispose of it, and then have just like the first glass of the second bottle, what he thinks is the first bottle. And she'll keep it a secret how absolutely plastered she actually is. And this secret keeping, having this like inside feeling that is so separate from Kieran that Kieran doesn't know about, is really powerful to her. But she is also just like drinking, like pretending she's going out with her friends and just like on her own getting shit-faced. This drinking is clearly a problem for her, but it is also a way for her to have some agency in her life. Throughout this book, Kieran has just been a piece of shit partner, a piece of shit man, and we never really know all that much about him. We do get a little bit of really interesting insight when the narrator and him go and see his father. Now, his father had left the family when Kieran was young, and he does not have a good relationship with this man. And this man is like all the time is just mocking absolutely everything Kieran does, copying the way he moves his hands when he speaks. Every little tiny thing this man is picking on. Now, Kieran, as we know from the book, does not like to feel mocked. That's something that's very irritable for him. But he cannot give the power over to his dad by reacting, by crying or screaming or storming out. So he just takes it. And that leaves them in this kind of stalemate where the dad's not getting the reaction that he wants. And also, Kieran is not getting what he wants because he's being relentlessly mocked by his father. Now, as the narrator is kind of getting some power back in her own life, it really changes the dynamic between the two of them. And Kieran starts to want her more now that she is not just like pathetically on her hands and knees begging for him all the time. And him wanting her more and not treating her with this cold cruelty makes her want him less. And she starts cheating on him a lot. The first couple times she does it, she's drinking and there isn't really any premeditation, and then with a man that she's already cheated on him with, she flies out to see him, and she like really plans out this entire affair that they have, and they are like keeping in touch, and she actually really likes this guy Nathan, and he is so starkly different from Kieran. Like, he opens up the world to her and makes her see that her life doesn't have to be this life that she's had with Kieran, of begging for love, of being so isolated and shut out from the rest of the world. Like, he shows her that's not everything there is in life. Finally, the narrator is pushed to break up with him. She thinks, I'm either going to go back and I'm going to live with him forever, or I'm going to break up with him, and I have to do it right now. So she like rushes back to her place, and he's there, and she says, I'm breaking up with you. And at this point, their dynamic has shifted, and she's expecting something other than what she gets, which is that mocking smile on his face saying, oh, are you? come and sit down in the bedroom. And she goes into the bedroom, and her diaries, where she has written about all of her affairs and everything she thinks about Kieran and like not really being attracted to him anymore, and all of her obsessions about Freya and about like wanting Kieran so bad while he was away. All of these things are just like laid out on the bed, and he starts reading from her diaries to her. And he reads from her diaries that she has written that she wants him to hurt her in a way that he hasn't really been able to understand during sex. And this causes him to violently assault her. And she just kind of like grits her teeth through it and thinks, if I can get through this, it'll all be over. And he finishes what he wants from her, and she takes her stuff and she leaves. And she moves to Athens. And then a couple of months after like moving to Athens, one of her friends, Mark, is like, I'd like to come visit you. Mark comes, and he comes on to her a lot, and she says no. And she keeps saying no, and she keeps pushing back against him, despite kind of wanting to just relent and let him do what he wants so she doesn't have to put herself in this vulnerable position of rejecting a man who could easily overpower her. But she doesn't, and he takes what he wants. The book ends with her floating in the sea in Greece and thinking about who she is without men, and thinking about how she's going to try to figure that out. Now, ending on the 2 assaults is pretty fucking bleak and pretty devastating, but I think that there is somewhat of a hopeful note here where she is realizing how much her identity relies on men and how she needs to move on from that. And as the reader, I think it does feel good to know that she is out of Kieran's grasp, especially because she has been so obsessed with this horrible man for the entire book. It's nice that it doesn't feel like she will ever go back to him. I think that this book was very well written. I think it was so vulnerable and so honest. I think that this is about obsession with a man in a way that is very real and I think very relatable. Like, the way that she acts towards him is not over the top like the other books that I've read in this video. It is the way a regular person would act if she had incredibly low self-worth and a really limited sense of identity outside of relationships. I think this book is really unafraid to get into the raw, dark, nasty places inside the mind of a woman who has crushingly low self-esteem and a devastating, insatiable desire to be desired, and how lots of times when you're inside that head, it fucking sucks. And it's not like feminist. Like, there are lots of things where she's like, I know that women are supposed to be beings outside of their relationships with men. I'm not. And I think that this is really interesting, and I think it deals with it delicately and with tenderness, but also without flinching. This book is entirely character driven, and I was really surprised with how much I wanted to read it, despite the very dark content and the fact that there is little to no plot. This is mostly just like inside this narrator's head, talking about her past experiences and how she relates mostly to the men in her life, including like her relationship with her father and with past boyfriends, and how she sees herself in relationship to men and never really outside of them. All of the characters in here were complex and they were nuanced. Maybe Kieran a little bit less so, but I think that you did get some things, like you could pull some things out of his personality or out of his past that made his behavior make a little bit of sense. He is just a piece of shit. And sometimes men are just pieces of shit. And sometimes women have really low self-worth and they obsess and they pine after men that suck. And that could be incredibly frustrating, of course. Like, what does she see in this guy? He has no redeeming qualities. And yet it also makes a lot of sense to me how she was so easily manipulated by him. I think this book was a nuanced portrayal of a toxic and abusive relationship told through really just like solidly good writing, and it was very impressive to me as a debut. It also had really, really short chapters, which is always very easy to read for me, so I felt myself really wanting to pick this up and wanting to read it and enjoying the writing and the insightfulness of it. I think that this was a good book, but also a very upsetting book at the same time. That is all I have to say for now. I actually have a bunch more books about obsession that I'm really interested in reading, so I'm sure you will see another video very similar to this from me very soon. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.